Hello and welcome to PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale History, where today we'll be making a return to BioShock Infinite. We talked about Infinite before in the Stowaways video, but today we'll be looking at it a little further as we explore Columbia, the city in the sky that Infinite takes place in. So we glossed over Columbia itself a little in the Stowaways video, so let's go a little bit more in depth. Columbia was founded by a man named Zachary Comstock, who claimed to have a vision of an angel telling him to found a city in the sky. With the help of a mysterious scientist called Rosalind Lutece and funding from the US government, Columbia became that city in the sky. Initially a way for America to show off its glory and prowess, Comstock eventually began to go against the US, using Columbia as his own personal battleship, with the city eventually seceding from the Union and becoming its own nation. This ultimately led to Comstock turning into a dictator, proclaiming himself to be a righteous prophet, creating a twisted brand of Christianity that worshipped the founding fathers as gods, and decreed that black people were inhuman, because of course he did. However, when we first entered Columbia in BioShock Infinite, there was none of this. Aside from a creepy baptism that you must go through before you can enter the city proper, there was nothing to suggest that Columbia was anything but a glorious example of America's greatness. In fact, when you entered the city, you were greeted with a beautiful shot of late 19th century buildings contrasted against the endless blue sky, and you started to think, this might not actually be so bad after all. This area was New Eden Square, the welcoming space for everyone who entered Columbia. An area filled with shops welcoming pilgrims to the city. This was a sunny, happy place that celebrated its own wonder. New Eden Square appears to be the basis for the Columbia stage in PlayStation All-Stars, especially as this has the same general feel of wonder and excitement that the initial area did, with none of the degradation or ruin of the back streets or the corruption of the industrial areas. In addition, there were balconies basically everywhere you went in Columbia and Infinite, and these balconies appear to be the basis for the platforms in the All-Star stage. But how do you get around a city in the sky? Well, as we saw in the Stowaways video, blimps were a pretty common method of getting around, but there was another way too, the skylines. These were specially designed rails that linked the various districts of Columbia together that basically turned the city into a giant roller coaster. Generally, these were used for freight purposes, with crates hooked up to the rails, but they were also used for transport too, although not every resident of Columbia took the train. Some people preferred to swing along the rails using skyhooks, small handheld devices that allowed the user to grapple on and propel themselves along. Booker DeWitt, the player character, gets one fairly early on, and in various sections you could use these to move around the areas of the game to gain an advantage over your enemies. Skylines are present in the All-Stars version of Columbia as well, and you can occasionally spot some crates being rattled along the lines as you fight. You can also spot members of the Vox Populi swinging around too. I covered those guys in Stowaways, so take a look at that video if you want to know more about them. Now, because Comstock was basically a crazy man who wanted to control the people, Columbia was naturally full of propaganda posters. Several of these posters can also be seen in PlayStation All-Stars, but there's a couple I'd like to go a little more in depth with. One of the many weapons you could use in BioShock Infinite was the Ralston's Reciprocating Repeater, which was a type of machine gun based on a real-life World War I German gun that you got early on in the game. Was a good general gun to have around. A poster advertising this gun can be seen in PlayStation All-Stars, using the same design as many posters found throughout the original city. Another poster shows a man named Baxter, although in BioShock Infinite his name was actually Hudson and he owned a shop in New Eden Square. The name change happened during development, meaning that All-Stars clearly makes use of old assets that were later changed by Irrational, a symptom of both games being in development at the same time. Speaking of which, a little thing to note, the original version of the Columbia stage, as noted in leaked images, had posters of Comstock on the walls, replaced in the final version by more generic propaganda, most likely due to a redesign of the character for the final game. Which makes sense, although it calls into question why the Baxter poster wasn't also changed. I think that pretty much covers all the BioShock stuff, so let's take a look at the music. Meet Krista Sparks. In the Twisted Metal reboot, she was a model, desperate to become the prettiest one there is. Now, Krista went beyond the stereotypical jealousy and bitchiness towards other models that you'd expect. She was outright psychotic, even going as far as murdering her competition. Following a car accident that left her disfigured, she murdered her plastic surgeon and suffered a breakdown that ultimately led to her getting a strange doll-like mask grafted to her face. From this point on, Krista became known as Dollface. She entered the Twisted Metal tournament because she wanted to remove the mask and become a star model again. While she was playable in the third part of the game's story, she was also a boss.
Dollface will do anything to get her dream. You think your wish is crazy? Trust me, when it comes to crazy, she's got you beat. But don't worry, I've parked something on the battlefield to give you a fighting chance. You'll need it because Dollface, she's quite ambitious. As you can see.
So yeah, this is Dollface's giant flying mech, the Iron Maiden. You have to fight this gigantic flying monstrosity as part of the story, and you have to do it in a normal vehicle. Isn't that nice? Iron Maiden appears in Colombia, where she taunts the fighters and spouts off some of her crazy lines. Many of these lines are taken directly from Twisted Metal, where she would taunt the player in a similar way.
Run, little man, run! Run, little man, run! No one will take my dream! No one will take my dream! I'm the prettiest one there is.
The Iron Maiden had various attacks, with the most common being a fireball attack that was kind of hard to dodge as they were bloody huge. The initial part of the fight required you to fire nukes at the Iron Maiden to lower its shields. Every time you did this, she would get angry and the Iron Maiden's face would rotate around to reveal an angry face instead. After knocking the shield down once and for all, this face would become the permanent face of the robot. With this, Dollface would start shooting smaller versions of the Maiden's head at you. These were essentially homing missiles that would stalk you around. They also made it harder to shoot at the Maiden itself, since your missiles would start targeting them instead. This is another one of the Iron Maiden's attacks in Colombia as well, where Dollface will alternate between the fireballs and the homing heads, and the places they hit will be marked with an icon of her face. She's kind of obsessed with her face, as you can probably tell. And now, the music.
The tooth!
So that's Columbia. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I'll get the next video done when I've got some time to kill. Stay tuned.